All right, ladies and gentlemen, today I want to show you a couple things with watercolor. What we're going to do is we're going to do a little bit of practicing using the watercolor, and what we're working towards is trying to create an art piece that combines watercolor and Zentangle. Now this is one that I did with my name, and I did a Zentangle pattern in the background. You know, if you just want to do some sort of watercolor background and just do Zentangle patterns over it, you can just do patterns. And I always tell people, if they can't think of something, you know, animals are always a good way to go. So this is one that I did the background, and then I did the dog drawing on a separate piece of paper, cut it out once I was done, and then I taped it on top. So this is actually taped onto the background itself. So this is what we're going to do. You need a 9x12 piece of paper. And on here, we are going to split this up into 6 sections. Now, they don't have to be perfect. You don't need to use a ruler for this. This is just us practicing using the watercolor. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try to split this in half long ways with one line. Then I'm gonna try to split it into 3 sections the other way. Now I'm gonna kind of label these to show you what we're doing in each one of them. On this first one, we're gonna do some layers. On the second one, we're gonna do a flat wash. On this third one, I'm gonna do wet on wet. At the bottom, we're gonna go with salt. In the middle, we're gonna go alcohol. And then the last one, we're gonna create a blend. Now, if you guys have used watercolors before, that's great. I'm doing this in marker so you can see it on the screen, but you might want to do this in pencil, because if your watercolor gets into this marker, it'll actually start bleeding and getting into your work. Like I said, I'm doing it this way so that you can see what I'm writing on screen. So I have my watercolors, I have a little water tray. I have the brush that comes with the watercolors, this green one. Then I have one that's a 1-inch, a little bit bigger brush, and that's what I'm gonna use to do this. So for the first one, we're doing layers. And that just is gonna show you how the watercolors look when you layer one color on top of another. And in order for this to look good, what we need to do is we need to have some really thin watercolor paint. So I'm gonna add quite a bit of water. So a lot of water, a little bit of pigment. And I'm just gonna kind of, you know, just paint a shape on here. And it doesn't matter what shape you do, you know. Try to brush it out nice and even. And now we're gonna let it dry. So we're gonna do this one first layer, and then we're gonna let it dry. And you need it to dry completely. So once it's fully dry, then you'll be able to come in with your other layers, your other colors. So one thing about watercolors is that whatever it looks like as you're brushing it, that's what it's gonna pretty much look like when it dries. So use your brush to work that paint around so it's nice and even as possible, okay? So now that I got that nice and, or as even as I can, I am going to stop there and move on to the next one. So nice thin paint, okay? Now for the next one, the flat wash, all that is you trying to create a nice even color. So I'm gonna take my bigger brush. And mix it into one of these colors. You know, add the water, mix it up a little bit. So the more you mix it, the more pigment you're gonna get into your paint. So I'm gonna just go back and forth and work this little container a little bit, so there's like more pigment and it's a stronger color when I paint it on my paper. Now what I'm gonna do, I'm just going to paint my paper. Now the one thing with watercolor, you do gotta work kind of fast, because once it dries, you know, it'll stay how it is. So what I'm gonna do for this flat wash section, like I said, we're just trying to create and practice moving that paint around and creating some nice even coverage. Once you have it nice and even, you can stop moving the paint around. All right, so that's the flat wash. For the wet on wet, we're actually gonna wet our paper first. Now this technique, a lot of people like to use because it gives you like random patterns. So like this example that I showed you earlier, you know, you kind of see, I guess we can call it kind of like a tie-dye effect. I don't know what to call it, but this is done using the wet on wet technique, because what you do is you wet the paper first, and then while the paper is still wet, you kind of put different colors on it. So artists like to use this technique if you're gonna try to do more of a like random pattern with different colors. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take some water and I'm going to wet the part that I'm gonna paint. And then once it has the water on there, then I'll take my paintbrush. I'm just gonna kind of touch the paper, and you see as soon as it touches, it kind of disperses and, you know, kind of does random patterns on there. I'm gonna go in with the second color. And then once I'm done with the second color, I'm gonna go in with the third color. I think I'm gonna go with a little bit of red. And that is the wet on wet technique. And what, like I said, what it does, as soon as the paint touches the water, the water makes that paint run and, you know, just kind of spread out randomly. Another thing you can do is sometimes I'll take like the end of my brush and I'll just kind of, you know, lightly, you know, do some patterns or like try to move the paint around a little bit with the end of my brush to create some cool looking patterns on here. So that is a wet on wet technique. Wet the paper first and then blotch some paint on there. Now we're going to the bottom left. For the bottom left, we're gonna use salt as a technique. And what the salt does, it will give you kind of like, I wanna say like a snowflake effect. So for the salt, we're gonna start with the regular flat wash. So I'm gonna use the green that I used earlier for the flat wash square. I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm just gonna paint on a nice piece. And when you use the salt, you just wanna do a little bit at a time, don't overdo it. And once the salt is on there, you wanna let it dry. So I've seen people that they'll put the salt on there, then they'll keep working it with their brush. And you don't wanna do that. You just wanna do your flat wash. And once it's still a little bit wet, you're gonna throw a little bit of salt on there. Now what the salt will do is it'll absorb some of the color. It'll absorb some of it. And then you just wanna let it dry just like that. And once it's fully dry, then you'll be able to scrape off the salt and it'll leave like a snowflakey effect to the background. That's what that does. Now the middle bottom, for that one we're going to do use alcohol for this effect. And what alcohol does, so you'll do a flat wash, you'll drop some alcohol, and what that'll do, once the alcohol hits the paper, it'll kind of just like disperse the paint a little bit, and it'll give you some cool effects. This picture that I showed you earlier with the dog, this top background, wherever the sky's at, that was using the alcohol technique. So let me show you what it looks like and how you should do this. So I'm gonna pick another color. I think I'm gonna go with purple. So right now I'm just adding water to that little purple container, the little purple section, and working it back and forth so I can get some of the pigment mixed with the water. You know, being careful not to spill a lot of that paint, because right now these are fairly new paints and they could make a big mess if you're not careful with it. So I'm gonna paint a nice flat wash. And whenever I'm painting, I'm not pushing down, not a lot of pressure on the brush. What happens if you start pushing too hard on the paper, with the water and the movement of the bristles, it'll actually start deteriorating the paper, and like little balls of paper will come up. So if that happens to you, that means you're overworking the paper and it's destroying the paper. So I'm just kind of going in here, working it back and forth lightly with my bristles. And once that's done, I'll take this little dropper bottle that has rubbing alcohol in it, and I'm gonna try to take some in the dropper, and you just kind of drop it on there. Now, something that you can also do, because this will give you like these dots, you know, pretty consistent size, but I've also seen people that'll like flick this little part of the dropper, and that'll give you more random sizes instead of just one big drop. Okay, as you can see there, I kind of put too much alcohol, and now it's kind of like running because it's oversaturated. So just be careful not to add too much. Same thing with the salt. Don't add too much. Don't overdo it, because then it won't do the same effect as if you just did, you know, a little bit, and that salt will absorb some of the pigment. Same thing with the alcohol. Don't overdo it, otherwise it'll start running and it'll just make a big mess. You know, this section right here, I really like how it looks. This right here, I kind of overdid it. And then for the last one, it's a blend. We just want to practice doing a blend. So what is a blend? A blend is taking two colors, starting one at the top, strong, and fading it light this way. And then starting the second color strong at the bottom and fading it lighter towards the other way. And as they meet in the middle, you're just gonna blend them and try to make them into one nice fade. So the colors I'm gonna use for this, I'm gonna use red to begin. I want that nice red to be really vibrant to begin with. And then as I work towards the bottom, I want it to fade out into a lighter red. So now I'm gonna take this brush and I'm gonna clean it off in the water so that that pigment falls off. You know, run the side of my brush off the little bin so the water comes off, because I just want very minimal water. And then I'm going to just work it back and forth. I'm gonna clean my brush again. Clean that brush again so it kind of fades into a lighter red. And see what happens with the marker? It kind of touched the marker. Now the blue is like bleeding into my little section. So from dark to light. Now I'm gonna take my second color, which I'm gonna go with yellow. I just need to work it because this is the first time me using yellow. So I need to take my water and really get that paint started. So I'm gonna start with the yellow dark down here. Nice, vibrant yellow. Now I'm gonna wash my brush out again, try to clean it out, get as much water as I can off of it. And I'm gonna take the yellow and work it upwards. Now I'm gonna clean off my brush again. And I'm gonna try to make this a nice blend in one nice little fade. So starting at the bottom with the yellow, work it up. Wash my brush off. Take as much water off of it as possible. And then now dip it a little bit more in the red. Now take the red and fade it down towards the yellow. Now I'm gonna work it one more time just to try to mix those colors with the nice little fade so that they kind of combine there in the middle. And that is a blend. So you're just trying to blend two colors together there in the middle to create a nice little fade. Now, one of the things I will tell you, I don't know if you can see this section, but I did this and then the water, the paper kind of sagged a little bit and it puddled there. So be careful with overdoing the water. You don't want to overdo the water because then it might do things that you don't want it to do, like this puddling of all the colors. And pretty much what it's doing, it's making this brownish color. And a lot of times you don't want that. All right. So now that I did all my sections, I can actually go back to this layering because it's pretty dry now. And I'm gonna add a second color, another layer to that section. So I think, oh, I touched it. I think I'm done with this one, with the blending. So now, I'm gonna take my brush, pick a second color. I think I like the purple. So add a little bit of water. Remember, we want this to be nice and watery so it's transparent and you can see the different colors as you layer them. And I'm just gonna come in with another shape that kind of goes on top of it. So you don't wanna do this too thick because then you won't be able to see the other colors. And you also wanna work it pretty quick because if you work it too much, what'll happen, it'll reactivate the orange and then it'll just mix there. So you actually wanna do this fairly quickly when you're layering. So I'm gonna do another shape here. And then now I am going to switch colors. Maybe I'll do a little bit of red, trying to thin it out so it's transparent and not too thick. I'm gonna go maybe with this shape right here. Remember, we said to work it quick, don't overdo it because then it'll reactivate the color on the bottom. Then I'm gonna do a nice shape. I'm just doing random shapes just so we can kind of see the different layers. And now I'm gonna let that dry. Then once the second layer is dry, then I can come in with some other colors on top. And you should be able to see the difference between the first layer and the second layer colors, especially where they overlap. You should be able to see both colors as they are overlapping. So you kind of get the idea. We're just practicing using this with the layers. One layer, let it dry, come in with your second layers, let those dry, and if you want, you can come in with the third layer so you can see the overlapping. Remember, for this, they have to be nice and thin. So very, I guess, watered down when you do this. Flat wash, use your big brush, your 1-inch brush, and just try to paint as even as possible. Wet on wet, wet the paper first, then you can dab with different colors and see what kind of, random patterns you can get with the wet on wet. Salt and alcohol, you'll do a flat wash on both of them. Put a little bit of salt on this one, drop some alcohol on this one. And then for the blend, 2 colors, going from dark to light and from dark to light this way, trying to blend them in the middle. Once we're done with this practice, it'll kind of give you an idea, hopefully, of what you like, what kind of effects you like, and maybe you can use one of these things when we start creating our final watercolor artwork. Now, as far as once you're done with this, you can set it aside, let it dry. And what we have next, this is probably gonna be done in the course of 3 or 4 class periods just to practice. We're gonna practice on here and then start doing our final piece. So I cut some half sheets. For this is a practice page. So you can kind of figure out what you wanna do for your final piece. Remember, the only requirements for the final piece is for you to take Zentangle, take watercolor, and somehow put them together to create an artwork. So these small pages will be your practice page. Now, I'll show you this one that someone has done. They're still working on it, but maybe you can kind of get the idea. So on this half page, they kind of practiced this. They did a little bit of painting, they drew their design, and they said, okay, now I know what I want to do. So once you're done with your practice page, you're gonna get another 9x12 piece. That'll be your final piece, your final paper. And on that final paper, this is what she has so far. So far, she's kind of drawing her animal. I think she's, if I remember right, it's a lion. And so she's gonna draw on here. And now that she practiced on here, she knows what she wants to do on here. So now she's working on this. Her idea is to do a watercolor background, do some watercolor in the animal, and then do Zentangle, once the watercolor is dry. Okay, so that's what I wanted to share with you today. The main thing is, use the practice page as a way for you to find out if maybe there's some techniques that you like. And then once you're done, our final objective is to create an artwork that combines water tangle and Zen tangle together. All right. So you guys go get your things. You guys share the water buckets, and we'll get going on our practice page. All right. We'll get going on this practice page. So layers, flat wash, wet on wet, salts, alcohol, and a blend.